Hi everybody, my name is Ally Dragozet and I'm the founder and CEO of Seagoing Green. So today I really want to unpack the impact of the tourism industry on the marine environment specifically. Yes. A little bit of an introduction about me. I was born in Serbia, I'm half Croatian, but I was raised in Canada my whole life. Even though I was raised in Canada, I still spent all my summers back in Europe with my family, and especially a memory from my summers in Croatia comes to mind. We're from this tiny beach town where the local community has a huge dependence on the marine environment there. And when I was growing up, the tourism industry wasn't the biggest in Croatia. But now, a country of 4 million people has over 21 million visitors every year. Of course, this was great for the local economy. Everyone was really happy. You can work for 5 to 6 months a year and live for the rest of the year off that. But then again, the local communities were complaining because they had to clean up the mess that the tourists were leaving behind. And you can actually see the water quality going down drastically. And unfortunately, this summer, this very beach here has a huge spot that's actually visible from space of sewage. So now I want you to imagine diving in the Great Barrier Reef. As a marine biologist, this is the kind of reef I always want to see. But unfortunately, this is more and more of what we're seeing today. And these kinds of changes can actually happen in a matter of months now, not decades like before. I unfortunately experienced this firsthand when I was living in Southeast Asia, and we were all boating to this one coral reef every day. Everyone was jumping in with a bunch of sunscreen on them, kicking around with their flippers, and the boat was also anchoring into the reef. 6 months later, there was no more reef. And unfortunately, this is a worldwide issue, as more than 75% of the world's coral reefs are projected to die by 2050. And unfortunately, I think this number is much closer to 90%. As the reefs are dying, the tourism industry is only growing, and we're actually set to hit 1.8 billion international tourists by 2030. But again, I think we're going to hit this number much sooner. So why is this such a big issue? The ocean is home to over 80% of life on the planet. Not to mention that it brings in over $35.5 billion of revenue every year. It also provides the primary source of protein for 2.6 billion people worldwide, and is a source of livelihood for fishermen globally. It's also, of course, a vital part of the food chain and home to marine biodiversity. A lot of species use reefs as nurseries. So why is this happening? Of course, this is a multifaceted issue, but I just wanted to highlight 3 here. Anthropogenic effects are a huge issue here. So of course, you can think of cruise liners, the effluent going into the reefs and marine protected areas isn't helping. But I'm also talking about the physical interactions we have with the marine environment. Back in the 70s and 80s, we had a tour on the Great Barrier Reef that was literally called Walk on the Reef, where a bunch of tourists were boated out every day to a shallow part of the Great Barrier Reef, and you can literally walk on the reef. You can imagine that this had lasting effects. Of course, that isn't allowed anymore, but those effects are still there. Unregulated and exponential tourism growth, of course, adds to this. You can think of all those hotels on the beach, everyone wants that ocean view, but what is the cost of that? Mangroves are being ripped out so that we have that beach area. This leads to land erosion, more pollution in the waters. And then global warming. This is leading to ocean warming, ocean acidification, and coral bleaching. And we can't forget the plastic soup. Cigarette butts are the single greatest source of ocean trash in our oceans today. Just take that in, something so small, which a lot of people don't even know has plastics in them. And one cigarette butt can actually contaminate over 7 liters of water in an hour. And half of the animals that are exposed to that water then fall ill. Can you think of what this is doing to the marine life, to us? This impact goes further, and we're actually affecting the behavior of the marine animals. So a seahorse that once used to latch onto seaweed, then is latching onto plastic bags, and then of course the infamous photo of the Q-tip. We're going so far that we're actually creating a whole new food chain. These plastics are turning to microplastics, which are being eaten by animals that then we eat, And studies are now showing that all human feces has traces of plastics in them. And we don't know the long-term effects of that. So these issues are also happening much closer to home. We're based in Amsterdam, and we actually saw this I Am Amsterdam sign going down a Museumplein in efforts to make the area a little bit less touristic. I can say that it is definitely working. I bike through it every morning. There are less tourists there. But for cruise tourism, for example, now they're not docking in the port of Amsterdam, but in Rotterdam. But then everybody's taking those big coaches back to Amsterdam. So that strategy isn't quite working well. And the coral reefs as well are a huge tourism attraction. And what these both have in common is that they're really suffering from the over-tourism that is happening on them. This brings me to the tourism paradox. I really like this figure because I think it illustrates it very well. And you should think about this more as a resource paradox. Tourism needs resources to thrive, be it social resources, economic, environmental. But as those resources are depleted by the tourism industry growing, of course the economy booms and that's great. But there is a moment that this all collapses because there are no more resources for the tourism industry to thrive off of. So unfortunately, we've actually seen this paradox time and time again. Does anyone remember Maya Beach, Thailand? It got very popular, especially with the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Beach. Everyone went there, everyone wanted their photo taken there. I was lucky enough to actually go there in 2013, but honestly, all I could remember was pushing through crowds on beaches and in the water. And of course, that really thick layer of sunscreen on the water, you couldn't see anything there. So the Thai government did close the beach down in 2018 in efforts to allow the biodiversity and the marine environment to regenerate. But the closing of this actually cost over 20,000 jobs. And of course, a big hit to the local tourism market. It's set to actually reopen in 2021 with new sustainable tourism policies, so we hope that it will be managed better. So these kinds of closures don't only happen on just beaches. This happened for the whole island of Boracay in the Philippines. This was once described as one of the most beautiful islands in the world, crystal clear waters, and it was literally turned into a cesspool. And this was said by the president in 2018. And this is a clear example of not respecting the carrying capacity of a destination. The waste management system was completely overrun. They did studies on the establishments based in Boracay, and out of the 125 surveyed, only 25 were actually hooked up to a proper sewage line. Can you imagine where all that sewage was going? So Boracay was actually closed for over 6 months. It cost over 40,000 jobs, everyone had to relocate, and over $1 billion in profits. It's now open, but with a really strict policy of no backpackers, no partying, very much a quiet tourism scene now. So we hope that works in the long run. So what do all these destinations closing mean? Of course, locally, the local economy hits a big job losses, and then also relocation. So in Boracay, for example, everyone literally had to get off the island because all of the jobs were mostly in tourism. So for small island developing states where the GDP is so dependent on tourism, this could be a really big risk. This is a direct example of mismanaged destinations and not respecting carrying capacities. Everyone just wants more and more and more, which is very much good for short-term gains, but not for long-term profit. And then of course, environmental degradation. We're hoping that the closure of these destinations will actually let them rebuild, but there's a possibility that they don't. So I really like this Asian saying that tourism is like a fire. It could really cook the meal, or it could burn the whole house down. And this is also just to illustrate the delicate balance between tourism and the environment that it so depends on. In order for this to be a long-term industry, more sustainable tourism policies are needed, and specifically in the maritime industry. And for this to be achieved, everybody needs to play a role, from the government levels, policymakers, to private sector, NGOs, consumers, tourists, tour operators especially. It is up to us to actually make these regulations and put them in place. Somewhere where these policies did really well, we heard about this morning, riding on elephants is not allowed anymore in most areas, which is great to see. But unfortunately, this hasn't transferred to the marine environment. We can still go swimming with dolphins. They don't call them attractions anymore or attraction shows. Now they're calling them training programs. View the training program. Yet you're still buying tickets to still see the same thing. Or here there's a picture of cruise tourists who are dropped off in the Stingray Bay, and they encircle the stingrays, touch them, feed them, completely change their behaviors. So this is where we come in as Seagoing Green. We are a sustainable tourism consultancy, really specializing on working with marine tourism companies, such as river cruises, yachting companies, and coastal hotels, and building whole island strategies. We do carbon footprinting management because we do believe that these baseline measurements are necessary in order to build good strategies. We also do environmental training, workshops, and green branding. And I'm gonna now cue a video of a campaign that we did last year for Earth Day. So that's just one example of the kinds of campaigns that we like to do. We always try to engage the local communities where our clients work. The Yacht Week is really famous for being the typical party holiday, but we really like their branding. And they've actually been doing these cleanups every year since they've been operating. They were just too scared to communicate it with their local community. They didn't want to seem like they were greenwashing or not doing enough. But with this campaign, we actually got worldwide coverage, and the local communities could actually see that they're trying to take those steps forward. I think the message of today is that small steps do count, and everything is necessary. One thing about cleanups, though, is that we always try to find a way to actually upcycle the materials we clean up. In Croatia, we were lucky enough that there was actually a recycling facility that could take the trash, but we've done these cleanups in Aruba, in Curacao, and on islands, the landfills are usually at the corner of the island, and one gust of wind blows and all that trash ends up back into the ocean. So please, when you're organizing cleanups, be wary of that and make sure you know where that's going. I also want to mention our new product that's coming out, which is called EcoNavis, and it's actually going to be supplying sustainable maritime data to onboard navigation systems. So when you're driving around on your boat and you want to drop your anchor, you can actually see, is there a coral reef under me? Maybe I shouldn't be anchoring there. Or am I in a marine protected area? There are certain laws and legislations that we should be abiding by. As you can tell, this product was directly inspired by my own story. We couldn't do what we do without our partners. That's why I believe today is so special, because collaboration is really key. And as we always say, a destination ultimately does lose its profitability when it loses its beauty. So what can you do to make sure that your tourism product isn't affecting the marine environment negatively? Of course, we've talked a lot about carbon footprinting today. To know how to manage your carbon footprint is really important. But I think this should be looked at as a short-term solution. The goal is to try to make your whole product carbon neutral at the end of the day. And really pick your carbon compensation projects wisely. For our marine clients, for example, we work with a Seagrass Grow Foundation, which literally plants seagrass to sequester carbon for our clients. Cooperate with local stakeholders to really make local marine policies and to put them into place. Take care of the local environment and biodiversity around you. And of course, educate yourselves and those around you. Eliminating single-use plastics, I don't think I need to say that anymore, but also really ensuring the proper disposal of them. And promoting sustainable brands, such as sunscreen. Of course, more long-term studies need to be done on the effects of sunscreen on the marine environment, but everything that we've been reading so far isn't positive. Thank you.